Good morning, everyone. Welcome and welcome back to our second conference day. My name is Mariama Diang, and I will, alongside my colleague Annalena Werner, navigate you through this symposium day. Before I will introduce our first speaker, the initiator and one of the heads of the Black Mountain Project, Annette Jael Lehmann, I'd like to send ahead in the name of the members and students of this project our gratitude for the general supports towards the Dahlem Humanities Center and its members who kept this project running until now. For those who didn't join yesterday, this symposium is after Black Mountain Models of Creativity held in 2014, the second conference of the research platform Black Mountain Research Project. Its focus lies on the educational turn within the arts reflected on and around Black Mountain College. Therefore, yesterday, James Elkins, professor of the school or at the School of the Art Institute, Chicago, discussed in his keynote what is research based on various forms of knowledge, possibilities and impossibilities of institutionalized artistic research as the PhD in artistic programs. Followed then by a lecture performance by Matt Wright, who is an artist himself and a composer and professor of composition and sonic art at the Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK and works closely with PhD students and musicians on their artistic research. In collaboration with the Hamburger Bahnhof and the students from the Freie University Berlin, platforms as the blog you can visit online have been developed to display and discuss the retrospectives of the Black Mountain College as well as its generative potential. So today's opening talk, Black Mountain, Educational Turn and the Avantgarde in Past Tense, is held by Annette Jael Lehmann, who is a professor of visual culture, modern and contemporary art at the Freie Universität Berlin. Her inter- and cross-disciplinary focus roots in research and in practice-based collaborations, as exemplified in the Black Mountain Project, with various institutions in academia, art, and culture. Combining teaching and research in a high productive way, her expertise lies in arts, visual arts, media and culture, digital art and humanities, environmental art, and contemporary theater, as well as historiographic reflections in the field, as in her latest publications, Exposures, Visual Culture, Discourse, and Performance in 19th Century America. In her introduction, Annette Jael Lehmann will take the educational turn and the Black Mountain as a role model for this current movement under a critical reflection by asking for the, quote, beneficial effects of discourses on the educational turn in our institutions, and in how far research about the history of Black Mountain College can be made productive for our current practices in teaching and learning in a more immediate, even naive way, to quote her again. I may now draw your attention to Annette Jael Lehmann, who could be in this sense seen as a mobilizer who connects and mediates between all levels, institutions, and individuals involved in this project with her energy.
Thank you very much for this beautiful introduction. I'm surprised. Just to warn you, this is not like a real talk. It is really an introduction. Again, an introduction to Black Mountain College, because I don't assume that everybody is so familiar, like we are now familiar with Black Mountain College, dealing with the subject over the last 2 years. Also, again, and that's not just rhetorics, it really comes from the bottom of my heart. I really want to thank Gabriele Knappstein and Mathilda Felix and Eugen Blume to put in so much energy and time, especially now in fall, where the art world also is at peak with their various events. And thank you so much for supporting this symposium today and yesterday. So let me put my glass. Just at the entrance of this outstanding exhibition, Black Mountain, ein interdisziplinäres Experiment 1933 bis 1957, there is protectively placed under a large front logo of Black Mountain College a long glass vitrine displaying several documents, that is, letters. Two of them are particularly relevant to me. The letters are very different but strongly interconnected. They both mark crucial points of departure. One is the unbelievably sober closing note of the Bauhaus by Mies van der Rohe, the other, a warm letter of invitation by Theodor Dreyer to Joseph and Annie Albers, guiding them through their exile to the United States to teach at Black Mountain College. But the display of these letters reveals a much larger looming question to me as I leave the exhibition through the same path. What is the crucial relevance of Black Mountain College for today's challenges in art, research, and education? How could the model of Black Mountain influence institutions such as the museum or the university today? Posing these naively broad questions with a purposeful ignorance of a specific reference to one or the other strain of debates over the last decades, I fail any specific approach to introduce an hypothetical answer. Also, I realize that tedious hermeneutics of the title of this conference, Black Mountain, Educational Turn in the Avantgarde, would be overwhelming and misleading. By chance, however, I can move on, choosing a detour for this introduction, encountering an article published by Hannah Arendt in 1943 in a small Jewish periodical, the Menorah Journal, titled We Refugees. In this brief but important essay, Arendt overturns the condition of a refugee, a person without a country, in order to propose it as a paradigm of a new historical and political consciousness. The refugee who has lost almost all rights receives an inestimable advantage. Arendt says, quote, refugees expelled from one country to the next represent the avant-garde of their people. For her, the refugee is a key figure of autonomy, and as Giorgio Agamben has put it with reference to Arendt, quote, the refugee is the sole category in which it is possible today to perceive the forms and limits of a political community to come. Arendt's concept of the refugee as a political resistant subject provides a perspective of Black Mountain College as a community of refugees, either exiled from Europe and or having to escape the American educational system, learning and living together, developing situated practices of artistic research and experimentation. From a historical perspective, Black Mountain's most important contribution to the educational turn and the new avant-garde of the 20th century was its radical orientation towards collective and pragmatic tasks, considering artistic practice and research as a tool to solve problems and improve life. Learning by doing, John Dewey's most cited credo, was actively practiced in order to imagine, to invent, or to develop new theories through physical performance. Situated amidst North Carolina's hilly countryside, right next to the idyllic Lake Eden, the educational institution has revolutionized models of academic teaching and learning. Founded by Andrew Rice, Theodore Dreyer, Frederick Georgia, and Ralph Lounsbury, all of which had just been fired by Rollins College in 1933, and forced to close under the direction of the poet Charles Olson in 1957 due to a lack of financial stability, the college existed in a time that motivated many to retreat into collective and idealist formations, developing alternative lifestyles during the time of the Great Depression and the World War II. At Black Mountain, collaboration was an act of multidisciplinary experimentation, combining interdisciplinary practices such as visual art, theater, music, literature, architecture, mathematics, physics, chemistry, geography, and history. The school realized a liberal pedagogy that followed the guidelines of cooperative learning advocated by the American philosopher John Dewey. Bringing experiences of art and everyday life, of physical and mental work together as one of the educational process, and considering knowledge as social skill in the classroom and outside as equally important parts. Also, Dewey's aesthetic theory influenced the college. He did not believe in the concept of a work of art, but in, quote, art as experience, the result of, quote, continuous and cumulative interaction of an organic self with the world, end of quote. Housing several former members, Black Mountain College adapted strategies of the Bauhaus, such as the collective working and living, and it integrated a concept of a close tutor and mentor activities as it was established at Oxford. While a reduced number of both teachers and students created an intimate atmosphere, all faculty members brought their families to live on campus. Not only regular courses, but also joint dinners, theater events, and costume balls belonged to the college's activities. Eric Bentley, who taught history and drama at Black Mountain, described the school's daily routine as one of, quote, endless activities scheduled morning, afternoon, and evening, weekday and weekend. Instead of sports, there is farm work, maintenance work, building, typing, stream of lectures, concerts, and meetings taking place, end of quote. Specifically, the building projects were essential to Black Mountain College's unique way of collaboratively living and teaching in a community. After purchasing extra land next to their campus, the college included the construction work of the Year Studies building, which was designed by architect Lawrence Kocher in their work program between 1940 and 1941. Having both students and faculty members participate in the project. Initiated not only due to financial shortages, the collective work was an ambitious project to educate students as human beings, to create a sense of collectivity and sustainability, and to enhance social competences along practical work experiences. Collectivity was also, shall I push this button? Okay. Collectivity was also regarded the key to experimental practices that comprised both educational and artistic processes. Joseph Albers, who was a school teacher and periodically director, employed experimental methods within the psychology of perception. His color theory explored socially constructed and embedded orders of perception, sensitizing for universal schemes of form and color. He reversed the scientific notion of the experiment. Instead of disproving previous hypotheses, he believed that valid theories could only be developed within and through practical experience. Testing different materials without aiming for a specific outcome or purpose, experiments were heuristic in their nature while being based on methods of trial and error. Mistakes and failure were thus a substantial part of the experiment. This approach affected both his work as a teacher and his artistic practice. Form was not ever supposed to be eternally determined, but instead he argued that there is no final solution in form, thus form demands unending performance, one of my favorite quotes. This flexibility was essentially to Albers' notion of art. Contrary to the actual content of an artwork, he proposed, quote, art is concerned with the how and not the what. The performance, how it is done, is the content of art. The artistic experiment was thus not so much thought in categories of succeeding or failing, but instead as an inherent part of creative processes, as experiences without calculated outcomes, as a transgressive conception of art. Also, Annie Albers, who taught weaving and pottery for more than 16 years at Black Mountain, employed experimental methods without a determined final outcome to make her students imagine and invent, to make them work with new material, to reconsider materials that they already knew. Quote, I tried to put my students at the point zero. I tried to have them imagine, let's say, that they are in a desert in Peru, no clothing, no nothing, and let them also imagine what they had to use at that point. Like Annie and Joseph Albers, stage designer Xanthi Czerwinski, who taught at Black Mountain from 1936 until 1938, continued his previous Bauhaus experiences and developed 3 theater plays that would establish the stage as a place for the students' interdisciplinary experiments. He explained his 2-part play Spectrodrama from 1936 as, quote, an educational method aiming at the interchange between the arts and the sciences, using the theater as a laboratory and place of action and experimentation. Spectrodrama incorporates an abstract scenography employing simple form elements such as triangles, cubes, plates, ribbons, triggering reactions in the pieces of the performers. Not the effect on the spectators, but on the participating performers is central to Stravinsky's multi-receptive strategy. Combining objects, bodily movements, spatial constellations, Spectrodrama was intended to constitute a space that provide an accessible structure for an event. Anticipating the effect of installation and performance-based art practices and participatory aesthetics, the Spectrodrama aimed to create an effective and sensual atmosphere. The piece was an act that would currently be labeled as artistic research, a work in progress functioning as a pedagogic dispositive with interdisciplinary strategies, in this case from theater, art, and design. These are just a few highlights the exhibition at the Museum Hamburger Bahnhof is giving us to understand paradigmatic forms of collaboration and exchange at Black Mountain College. Thanks to the really outstanding curatorial performance and exhibition display, it is easy for us to identify the central forces of education at Black Mountain, a disposition of experimentation and a dynamic network of sharing knowledge with unpredictable results, including failure and conflict, but no fierce competition. This notion of education as collaboration as Black Mountain was hardly embedded in a theoretical framework of interdisciplinary or interinstitutional cooperations we are debating over the last 20 years. And therefore, in particular, I wondered, what are the beneficial effects of discourses on the educational turn in our institutions? How is even the widely spread ideology of an educational turn today dependent on neoliberal market economies as a dominant form of globalized culture, resulting in utilitarianism and profit orientation of global art, academia, and education? But at the same time, I'm turning away from that approach, posing a more complicated question. How can we make our research about the history of Black Mountain College productive for our current practices in teaching and learning in a more immediate, even naive way? In other words, and this may be my central question for today, what are the potentials of interinstitutional collaborations and research practices for the precarious autonomy of art and education today? So you may notice at this point again that speaking about an educational turn today is almost an uncanny undertaking to me. It makes me sense a ghostly presence of a persistence rhetoric since the 1960s, claiming the turn to, the turn away from, or the return of productive educational practices in art and academia, however hard to grasp as a real thing. Obviously, we can refer to more than to metaphors, pleas, or theories addressing an educational turn. Generally, it describes a tendency in contemporary art, aesthetics, and theory, again more prevalent since the second half of the 1990s, in which different modes of educational forms and research practices, alternative pedagogical methods and forms often appear in as collaboration of art and exhibition practices and academic research. In most cases, their emphasis is not put on the object-based artwork or project, but instead the focus of these interdisciplinary and interinstitutional practices is often directed on the process itself. At the same time, it is directed on the use of discursive pedagogical methods and situations inside and outside of the narrow institutional realms of art and academia. But this notion of an educational turn as a trend in the field of a currently fading postmodernist period of art and aesthetics is omitting one more pressing question. I think I'm supposed to press this all the time. So this notion of an educational turn as a trend in the field of a currently fading postmodernist period of art and aesthetics is omitting a more pressing question. Although we might retrospectively consider Black Mountain as a cliché of the sustainably succeeding model for an educational turn, we now seem to hesitate to evaluate the college presently under two central categories of modernism, autonomy, and avant-garde. Are these categories, even from a historical backdrop, still relevant for our current educational practices? What does learning by doing imply for the sake of autonomy today? When and how does collaboration develop innovative forms of art and knowledge production with the goal of a critical and productive change first and foremost in the art world and academia itself? After dealing with the Bologna reform, we are currently confronted with an inescapable set of financial restrictions and bureaucratic requirements in our educational system and cultural institutions. How can we overcome these obstacles? And more importantly, in this scenario, what are the effects of privatization on a large scale, establishing an often inaccessible world of art, culture, and education as a parallel existence for a small financial elite? Moreover, I have to admit that Black Mountain College is largely incomparable to our today's teaching and learning conditions because of our collective conscious, which is based on today's dominant model of employability and success. Educational institutions are doomed to provide techniques of optimizing careers and commercializing the students' and the teachers' art and research. One might then conclude that Black Mountain College accomplished an educational turn and produced an avant-garde that simply cannot serve as a translatable model today. But it may then rather be recalled in a transformative way. This exhibition and its collaborations offer a model of such a transformation. And this transformation is possible in particular through the involvement of the works of many students in its course, particularly in the project Performing the Archive by Arnold Dreiblatt. Many works of arts, documents, and materials, as well as performances by the students of various academies all over Europe, call for a recursive temporality. They are temporal knots interweaving past and present. They reveal and preserve what remains from the archives of this period and make their aesthetics alive again in form of a real presence. Thus, traces of the avant-garde are perceivable again in the immediacy of an involuntary memory. Like that, the Black Mountain exhibition displays the coexistence of two temporalities, entangling the complex question of an educational turn and the avant-garde in the past and present. So very thankfully, I like to claim in today's introduction that these various formats of collaboration between the museum, the art academies, and our university have been unprecedentedly productive for the students and young scholars, artists and curators being involved. 2 years ago, we began to work the research project Black Mountain Research in collaboration with the developing of the exhibition Black Mountain, ein interdisziplinäres Experiment 1933 bis 1957 at the Hamburger Bahnhof Museum für Gegenwart, Berlin. And this project had its base not so much in advanced planning, but in-depth conversations and dialogue with all parties involved. Also, our first steps did not emerge out of a set of theoretical assumptions. The first questions of our collaboration were more of a more pragmatic nature, so to speak, and it was our students who mostly answered them. Amongst other things, they also suggested to form a digital platform for exchange and outreach. Reaching out to for everyone to read and participate, this blog created an open source platform that now hosts numerous articles, statements, interviews, photographs, and videos documenting and expanding the performative research we did during the last years. Students, curators, artists, and scholars each contributed to creating a substantial archive of active knowledge production, an unfinished work in progress online comprising ideas, questions, inventions, and opinions. A group of students expressed their experience of collaboration and collectivity in these projects as follows. Quote of the students. Artistic working processes are as different as their results are. Over and over, we wondered how groups can work together, how groups are formed, and how results are presented. Art always emerges in the context of many. The context of a subject towards surroundings, a duo, a collective, in this case of Black Mountain as a group of students, teachers, and visitors. Eventually, a work of art mirrors a process. How can we collaborate today, mastering contexts that have become more complex? What is still and what will be again contemporary? And yes, in view of our today's title of the conference, Black Mountain Educational Turn and the Avantgarde, the central question indeed is, what is still and what will again be contemporary? My hope is that our collaboration of the university and the museum in Black Mountain research can become a venue for continuous collaboration between otherwise distinct forms of cultural knowledge production and display of art addressing the public. I also hope that our discussions today allow spreading sparks of reflections and seeds of pragmatic suggestions for this process, asserting a visible distance from relativism or nihilistic defeatism, which I often observe in contemporary art world and the humanities. What education then could stand for is a regrounding of the subject in a practically embedded sense of responsibility and ethical accountability for the institutional or even larger social environment he or she inhabits. Last but not least, referring to an educational turn today is situated in the highly problematic field of the tradition of German idealism. Gayatri Spivak has recently published a collection of essays entitled An Aesthetic Education in the Era of Globalization, a collection from the year 2012. The title of this collection, of course, invokes Friedrich Schiller's 1794 series of letters on the aesthetic education of man, and Spivak's meditations on public education, culture, and pedagogy are clearly keyed to that German romantic and idealist conception of art as an instrument for moral enlightenment of a mass public in a post-revolutionary age. It is Schiller who sees in the arts the possibility of cultivating the kind of judgment, empathy, and sociability that could make for sympathetic moral and political unity. But if Schiller remains only a cursory presence here, it is because Spivak's tenacious sense of the inequality of contemporary global life and the failures of the academic as well as the art world, which cannot fit so easily with such idealism. What Schiller imagines to the happy play of the ethical and aesthetic forms implies a double bind or an incorrectable dilemma. It is, though, Spivak's assertion after Schiller that an aesthetic education remains a strong resource available for the course of global justice and democracy. The key figures of aesthetic education today and in the times of Black Mountain are the refugees and their quest for freedom and autonomy. Their time, and maybe also our time frame, is always the future interior, that is to say, a linkage across the present and past in the act of constructing and actualizing possible futures. Our collaborations will have to be, so to speak, future-proof, measured by the long-term effects in society. What we do and how we do things together will eventually also prove if we can claim in view of Black Mountain College that their history has always been our future. Thank you.